All right, good evening, everyone. This is Andrew here at Man's Organics, Southern Alberta, more specifically north of Coaldale. And yes, we're here live in our greenhouse. And as you can see, I'm standing in a tomato and cucumber crop. And yeah, we're going to dive into some of the things. We've got 3 locations we're going to be at, so I'll talk for a few minutes at the locations, and then we'll stop there for some questions. And feel free to ask questions, feel free to ask for detail, anything you're interested in. So yeah, like I said, this is our greenhouse. We've got cucumbers here. These crops have been in the ground for a few weeks. They're starting to do well. And anyways, let's dive into the soil. I thought I would first start over going over the soil. So we're on loam to sandy loam soil. We started growing in this greenhouse 10 years ago. This is actually the 10th crop that's in the ground. And we've done a lot of work with the soil, with soil testing, but also with amendments and the fertility of the soil. So we started with approximately a 3% organic matter soil. And the top, of course, has a lot of organic matter. We've added a lot of amendments, but we're definitely in the territory of 8 to 10% currently. So that's been really big gains. What we typically do for the soil is we add amendments in between the crops, and in between the crops for us is somewhere in December or January. So these crops go in the ground late January, February, and they will start producing in a few weeks, and they will produce into December. So it's a long season, but we have all of that time, and during that time we don't do much on the physical soil amendments. We do definitely watch crop nutrition, but the soil amendments are more based on the flocculation and the overall fertility, keeping up, for example, the potassium levels. Potassium is one nutrient that we use a lot of on these high yielding crops. And just working in general. Some of this is learning from experience. Some of it is based on the base saturation numbers, and some of that I think it's good to take everything with a grain of salt, use some soil tests, and make some decisions from there. I did think to demonstrate a few things. One of the tools I use more often is this soil EC meter, and what we'll do, it's checking, of course, soil electrical conductivity, which is a measure of the salts, which is the nutrition, and soil probe in the soil, and checking for a couple of things. One, definitely on these high yielding intensive crops, we're after some higher numbers than typical. We have a lot of demand, a lot of nutrition load all season long on these crops, so we definitely want to keep enough EC, enough activity. It's definitely an indication of what the biology is doing. And another thing to watch for is the stability or the level of that number as we go in. So it's nice to see an equivalent number as much as possible from the top inch to kind of, as this probe is about 6 inches long. So that's just one tool to kind of, as the season goes on, it's not necessarily hard math or a hard number, but I like to just compare it between the crops, or even sometimes when a cucumber crop, for example, is loaded up and you've got some nutritional challenges, this just to keep an eye on it and see what's happening. It'll definitely change, and you've got to kind of keep in mind where the moisture is at in the soil from irrigation and such. So that's one tool. Good one to have, good one to kind of keep in mind and check every couple of weeks or so. And another thing, really definitely for the soil and keeping in mind how we want to open up our tight soils. And I'll use the words from Glenn Ravenberg, but he talks about the ABCs of soil: the air, the biology, and the carbon. Now, to get that to work, we need soil that's open, that the air can go in, that the bugs, the biology can live in and really be happy with. Now, a good tool for that is a penetrometer. So I've got mine right here, and as most of you probably know, this measures the PSI of the soil. And the greenhouse here is really a spot where I can show this off, and even just use one hand, and you'll see different levels. I got tighter spots and looser spots, but definitely areas where we've really seen gains in the past with some of the amendments we've done, and trying to keep in mind that the more soil flocculation to have, the more we have an open soil, the more we have area and ecosystem for the biology, and the more nutrition we have cycling in general. So just kind of that perspective of we would like to have access to as much soil as possible for our crop, which is high yielding, which the yield at the end of the day still pays our bills. So we're after a quality plant, but to get a quality plant, we need a healthy soil and a soil biology system that's functioning well. So all of these things kind of work together. There's nothing that works on its own. So it's this interplay of everything that kind of, as a farmer, you are the expert of your farm, and you need to keep that in mind and try to work with your soil and with your plants. So all right, I think this is a good time to show. So we use drip lines. All of our greenhouses are irrigated with drip, and what we use now is we use three sets of a drip tape. This drip tape has an emitter every 12 inches, and we use 3 lines on a bed, what we call a bed here. Now all of this we purchase here from our local Southern irrigation dealer, and they're great guys to work with. They help us out on all of the technical specs on the output of drip lines, and how many feet on the efficiency and the accuracy of the drip. Also all of the other supplies for running drip tape, the pumps and the valves and actuators and everything that we need is supplied there. And yeah, great technical support, great guys to work with. We're thankful they're willing to sponsor us. One other part of our irrigation system is that we actually monitor the exterior light we're getting from the sun, and our irrigation intervals are based on how much sunlight energy we're getting. So we have fixed irrigation times based on that, but they may be triggered more often on a sunny day and less often on a cloudy day. So we've got a greenhouse control system that monitors the irrigation as well, and that is our input factor, the most determining factor of when we irrigate is the sunlight. Now I will monitor on a weekly or bi-weekly basis the soil, checking with a shovel or checking a little deeper, seeing where the levels are. We've started to use some tensiometers, so they're pre-installed in the soil at various depths, and they are you put a vacuum on, and then there's a vacuum gauge, and you can kind of base the plant's needs of moisture and what's happening on how much vacuum is on this gauge. Another great tool from Southern Irrigation. So when we monitor irrigation, I tend to actually irrigate enough for a while and then like to back it off and get the roots to really expand into that soil zone and reach out. We like to move irrigation around if we can help it, and that way we get as much soil wet with water as we can, and this allows the worms and the biology to get all of the nutrition that's in the soil, and there's definitely a higher amount of biology and worms in areas with moisture, so that's definitely something we're looking out for. The worms and the biology in the soil definitely like the environment, and as we get into the year, we start pruning leaves off of the bottom of these crops. These are just vining crops, and as we prune these leaves, we've started to drop them on the soil surface, and the biology is thriving on that. It takes a few weeks for it to adjust at the beginning of the season, and once that biology is adjusted, we find it's really breaking down the leaves. And cucumbers have a high rate of growth, so we'll see probably up to 3 inches of growth per day on a good cucumber plant in the summer. So that means we're pruning a couple of leaves per week off of a plant. So we've got some 10-inch, 12-inch even leaves, and we'll be pruning 3 or 4 of those a week and dropping them on the soil, and the biology will just digest that, and we'll take that nutrition and we'll put it right back into the soil. So I'm not sure how we're doing for time. I think I've covered some stuff. I have a bunch of other things, but I think maybe definitely a time for people to jump in with some questions if you have any.
Yeah, great. Yeah, feel free, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat, or if you'd like, you can use the raise hand function, and we can call on you to ask your question to Andrew. Pierre has a question. Go ahead.
Hi, Andrew.
Yes.
I was wondering, your greenhouse is built on the original soil,
Yes, so what we did is our farm was already certified organic before I came back to work with my parents and build a greenhouse. So yes, the land we built this greenhouse on was certified organic before we built, and so yeah, we built the structure on the land, and yeah, it's come a long way since then. But correct, we're actually growing in soil that was here. Sure, we added some topsoil and other amendments, but we've not not brought in any major amounts of compost or any beds. We are actually, yes, growing in the soil that's been part of our farm from before the greenhouse time.
Okay. I haven't been through too many commercial greenhouses, but every one I've seen they have basically they're on concrete. So is this common to have it directly on the soil?
No, this is quite unique. We were mentioning that earlier here as we were chatting, and that is probably our biggest real difference is the soil. That we follow similar heating systems or the greenhouse structure or even control or even plant care when it comes to pruning or anything, but actually growing in the soil is really uncommon. I have visited a few other commercial organic greenhouses, and the ones I did visit, they were still growing in kind of a raised big bed or trough where they were pre-mixing the potting soil compost, making a bit of what they were trying to attempt as a living soil, and putting it in a fixed container or long trough rather than growing in the soil. So as far as we know, what we're doing here directly in the soil is very unique yet.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Andrew. We had another question from Alex. What kind of amendments are you using, and how did you increase the organic matter by so much?
Yeah, so on the amendments, it's been things like gypsum, for example, for the flocculation of the soil. Things like alfalfa pellets. This I should actually describe what we've switched to now. So this past season, what we did with our amendments, we had some feather meal, we had some alfalfa pellets, we had some sunflower hull ash for a high potassium source, a little bit of gypsum, and we actually pre-mixed that with some compost to get it more of a homogeneous mixture, and that way we also bulked it up, and it gave us an option for spreading it. We have to spread in the greenhouse here by hand, so to give us a homogeneous mixture, we could spread at a rate and get a better mix of things, rather than we used to try with even a 5-gallon pail, but then we'd have to spread that pail on a whole 140-foot row, and that can be a little challenging to keep it consistent. So we've pre-homogenized the whole mixture to spread it out and added some compost, and the compost I thought it was finished compost, but when we added all of those amendments, it actually fired up again with moisture. And so I kind of like that theory, and I might try it more, is to actually even allow that composting cycle to carry on with the amendments added, so that it's fully integrated with that biology, and then bring that that amended compost out into the greenhouse soil. And we actually do till it in, so it's a large rate of amendments into the quite a few tons per acre, and we do like to rotor till that in just to make sure it's blended with for the rate, just so it's not basically too hot. And so we do come through with a rototiller when it's dry. And another strategy we've gone to then is because it's dry and been rototilled, the environment is somewhat been detrimental to the biology. So we seed a couple of rows of cover crops, a mix of oats, peas, buckwheat, phacelia are the main ones. And then we actually irrigate, and we let that crop germinate and grow just as a kickstarting of the biology. And soon after that, we come in with our plants. These are grown as 4-inch plants. We'll take a peek at those later. So that's kind of been our strategy at this point.
Awesome, thanks. We have another question from Carla, kind of related to Pierre's question, asking, if there are periods of heavy rain, do you find your soil is heavily impacted inside the greenhouse?
Good question. No, so the gutters, this is what's called a gutter connect greenhouse, and the gutters do drain exterior, and we have just an overland drainage system with some swales, and we actually catch that water in a collection area. We have noticed along the back wall where those gutters come down that we do have a higher moisture in the soil. But to say that it impacts the crops we grow in the greenhouse, no, we've not had any issues with that.
And then we have two more questions. The first one, do you ever need to rotate in a green manure crop?
Okay, we've never rotated, I guess I could say, with a crop that doesn't yield. So at the 10-year mark, we're still growing a full production crop every season. We do rotate in terms of trying to switch around the tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers. It's not a perfect rotation. We grow more tomatoes than we do cucumbers and peppers, so we have a higher percentage of tomatoes. So it's definitely far from a real good rotation, but we do allow diversity to grow. I can actually show right here. We've got things like this 4 o'clock, this flower, and they just they're kind of a tuber type plant, but they regrow. We don't plant anymore, so we got lots of variety coming up. We let other things grow. Like I said, we seeded some oats and peas and buckwheat. Here's a really beat up piece of buckwheat. Here's some buckwheat that's flowering. So yeah, we kind of let some of these other plants just grow. We kind of say if it's not a tomato that's not supposed to be summer, it's not a weed. So most things we let grow, and I think allowing some of that diversity just to grow here and there. Now it doesn't necessarily grow a lot because it can't really compete with our crop. These crops grow up in a few weeks. They're 5-6 feet high and they're really canopying out, so there's not much sunlight left. So the other plants don't, for the most part, don't compete and don't cause any issues. So I think as we have a little bit of that diversity growing in the soil, that's I think a big factor. And certainly in the early years it was a big concern. What's going to happen to the soil, fertility? Everybody we talked to early on said, well, a couple of years you'll have disease issues with the soil, all kinds of problems, and we never have. So I kind of attribute that to being that the soil foods, the soil amendments are working with the biology, or they're food for the biology. We're not using any chemistries that are harsher on biology. So we're I think just feeding the system good in general, and then just allowing that biology to be and allowing some of these other things to happen. And it does seem that the system works, and we haven't had to go to I'd like to grow more cover crop, but it seems like every time we do it over the winter, there's just not that much time. What we have now is we have a tomato plant which is setting the second set of fruit. The first one is down here, and right now this plant is very vegetative. It's very strong. It's leafy. It just wants to grow. There's no fruit load on it yet, and we're after setting some fruit. And once we have fruit set, we're after generative growth and vegetative growth at the same time. So we want a plant to continue to be strong enough to keep growing more stem, more leaves, keep growing canopy, keep capturing sunlight, but at the same time we want to maximize the pounds that we're harvesting and ripening. So there's several ways we do that. We have a few, I guess you could say, less tools than the conventional growers, but one is climate. So at this point, we've got some strong plants. We've got the ends of the leaves are doing some twisting. There's a lot of energy in these plants. So we'll let the afternoon temperatures, especially today was a very high light day, so we'll let the afternoon temperatures climb to about 28 or 29 degrees Celsius. And right now we'll cool it down. Right now it's about 18 degrees in here. So we go to a cool pre-night. We want to, the energy that's in the plant from the growth of the day, when we cool it down at night, what happens is our leaves they get cool quick because there's not much biomass there. But once we have pounds of fruit hanging on the plant, the pounds of fruit stay warmer, and that warmer area of the plant actually draws in and assimilates, and that's what keeps setting size and fruit. So we like to cool the nights down fairly quick, run it cool for a few hours, and then warm it up again overnight, and keep it not too hot in the morning, but let the temperature come up with the sunlight. So that's the one guidance. Another thing to make a tomato tough, or to get it to be more generative, is to be hard on it. So to be hard on it, one of the things is to wind it good. Another is to pull leaves off. So it's prune bottom leaves. We haven't done pruning on these, but pretty soon we'll be pulling these bottom leaves off. And like I said earlier, we'll be leaving these on the ground, but we'll pull a bunch of bottom leaves off like that. And that's another action on the plant that will tend it to a more of a generative state. So we can watch the stem diameter here. It's a pretty good size. It's almost on the thick side, but if that gets too thin, we're too generative. If it's too fat, we're too vegetative. So those are things we're watching. We don't have the direct day-to-day control of the EC in the root zone. So conventional growers will monitor the ECs and make changes on that. But because we're a biological based system, we don't have that tool on that quick basis. So we don't worry about that. We do know that at the beginning of the season, we're coming into a fairly high nutrition environment. We put feather meal and stuff for nitrogen, so we know there's a lot of soil fertility there, and that really wants to grow a big bushy plant. So we just have to keep that in mind, and our biggest tool there is the temperature. Another thing is to really watch the water. So as soon as these plants have an established root system, we're trying to keep it literally as dry as we dare without harming the plant. So that dryness is another factor to swing the plant to a generative side. If we give it lots of water, it'll just continue to grow a fatter stem and continue to be more vegetative. And we really want to make sure that these flowers, we want them to set down. We don't want them to be turned up. We see some kind of purpling color on the plants here. And so yeah, that's what we're after. That's kind of a strategy. And another note here is we're in beginning of March here, and these are 4.5 feet tall already, but we've seen vine growths of about 40 feet by the end of the season. So we'll continue to work on this crop. Once we get to kind of probably between a 9 and an 11 foot height, we'll actually be lowering this crop. We continue to bottom prune. The vines are laying. We'll keep moving the crop in. You harvest at the bottom, prune leaves off, and keep setting the fruit. So another note on these is these are beefsteak tomatoes, and they will set big clusters of flower, but we will actually be coming by and pruning these down to depending on the variety. On beefsteaks 3 fruits, on TUV 5, and on Romas 6. So we'll prune the fruit sets to what we want to try keep some consistent sizing there for marketing. One other thing is on the tomatoes, we do use bumblebees for pollination, so we monitor that, and we can actually open up a flower and take a look at it, and we'll see the bruising of the bees if they visited. This one is very light, but we'll be able to tell from the flowers where we're at for pollination. So that's we bring in some beehives. They are good for 8 weeks. They're just a cardboard box from the companies that supply the beneficial insects. We get those from them as well. And I think I could talk about some of the soil nutrition, but maybe, the sap analysis and plant nutrition, but maybe it's a good time for some questions.
For sure, yeah, we got a lot of questions and a lot of people loving this tour so far and seeing the scope of your greenhouse. This has been awesome. The first question is, how do you deal with weeds?
Yes, so most of the time the weeds are not a problem. I guess I could say 2 things. For one, definitely at this point, we're not getting other weeds other than things that we've maybe planted. And really, a tomato is a tough plant. A tomato is the toughest plant we grow, and nothing will outcompete a tomato other than another tomato. So if it's a tomato we planted, it's good. If it's a tomato that grew from, let's say, grape tomatoes, they tend to drop some fruit, and those will germinate or can germinate in following years. That is our source of weeds, and really that is very much one of the only issues. For the rest, we don't have much issue in terms of anything growing that it's a problem. So it's not to say that they don't grow, although we don't see much anymore. I think because we're in a contained environment, we're not getting more seeds in, or amendments, we're not bringing any in. So yeah, other tomatoes that we don't want, that's pretty much the only weed.
For sure. And what is your water source this time of year?
Yes, okay, so we are on the St. Mary's River Irrigation District for irrigation water, and formerly, before we had the greenhouse, my dad was a small custom feedlot, and we have a large dugout. So in the fall, we just make sure it's full, and that makes us through the winter no problem. So yeah, it's runoff from the mountains is what it is, and it's on that note, it's a bit hard water, high pH, but it's working well for us.
Awesome. Another question, what does it indicate if the flower is set facing up versus down?
Yeah, so if the flower is long and it points up, then that's an indication that the plant is very vegetative. We want to see a strong set. We like to see things compact and tight enough rather than too lanky and tall. And if a plant is really vegetative, sometimes these will kind of point out and straight up. So we're in the instance where, like now, typically at the beginning of the year when the plants are on the vegetative side, we have to use those actions of, okay, high afternoon temperature, high 24-hour average temperature. A higher 24-hour average is generative, lower 24-hour average is vegetative. But the bigger the spread between the high and the low of the day is also generative, and the closer together is vegetative. So between those things, cool at night, quite hot during the day, less water, those are all the things that we're trying to, and like I said, on a tomato, you can literally think about beating it up to pull some extra leaves off. Sometimes in a few weeks, as we get to the really high light time of the year, and if we want to get some light in, we'll actually probably start pruning what we call a top leaf. So we'll find the top leaf that's across from a flower, and we'll prune it off. So it's just taking one of these off. So we'll have less leaves, more sunlight in the canopy, but less leaves altogether is another action just to keep the plant pruned down for being more generative. And as soon as we get fruit load on, the more the fruit that hangs on the plant, that's just generative in and of itself. So once these grow for a few more weeks and they start to get a few clusters of fruit, we'll have anywhere from probably 3 to 6 or 7 clusters of fruit at various sizes. So when the first 3 or 4 are sized up and ripening, there's a lot of pounds. There could be 10, 15 pounds on a plant hanging there, and that's a big generative action as of itself, as the energy from the plant is going into those fruits yet to finish them off.
Awesome. We're getting lots of great questions in the chat here. Another one from Lori. With putting the leaves on the ground, do you ever get slugs?
Very good question. So the answer is we've started to, and last year was a slight concern, and that'll lead me, I'll demonstrate something else here, and that is what we've discovered is we have a bit of an issue with wood lice or pill bugs. And these don't have any. Oh, worms are eating that one. So this is spaghetti squash. We grow squash in the summer. We've had extra. So what we did is, because our pill bugs or wood lice were a concern, we started to cut these in half and put them down on the soil as basically alternative food so that they don't go and eat our new plants. Now, what we discovered is that is very effective slug bait. So we're standing in a zone of about 10,000 square feet, and my boys helped in their reading week to collect the spaghetti squash, and they claimed they collected 487 slugs in one day. So we haven't had a big problem yet, but I think this may be an answer or a solution to keeping the slug population under control, because I think it's growing. In previous years, we really never saw any. Last year we had some here and there, a few corner plants along the walls where there's some more moisture. But like I said, I think with baiting it, we probably can avoid the problem. But yeah, a concern I just don't have a lot of experience with yet.
For sure. Sounds like a fun reading week for your kids. Another question asking, are all the plants here grafted to rootstock?
Yes, so actually this year all of the tomatoes in the zone we're standing in, so these are all the large fruiting tomatoes, so the beefsteaks, the Romas, the tomatoes in the vine, and yes, these are all grafted this year. So we do all of our own propagation, and so grafting is another step, but this year we decided to graft them all. Last year we did not, and at the end of the year we had some intermediate yearly nutritional struggles, and at the end of the year the kind of overall yield statistics weren't great. We're a little bit disappointed, so we reviewed it all and we said for the effort of grafting, we're going to go back to grafting at all. So yes, everything is back to grafting on the like the big fruited tomatoes, which have much more demand and much more yield in a year. We did not do the grape tomatoes, we just left them on their own.
Awesome. And we will do this last question and then we can go on to the next section. Have you had any issues with disease?
Disease can be a concern. For us, it's typically, if we have years that it's powdery mildew in cucumbers and potentially mildew in tomatoes, tomato varieties that are not resistant. We try to only use resistant varieties. So really it's powdery mildew in cucumbers, and it's hit and miss. We've had excellent years with no mildew, and last year was another challenging year. It's definitely nutritionally related. If we see the reverse effect. I'm a firm believer that a healthy plant will not suffer from disease, but it's easier said than done. We're still struggling and we're still learning. But I've definitely seen more often that when we have a clean cucumber crop, it's going good, and we don't have mildew, the Sap analysis, the results come back, good micronutrient levels, good balances, good nutritional balances across the board. When we have mildew issues, typically we're struggling with the balance of micronutrients and other nutrition in the plant. So there's definitely a relationship. I don't have a recipe or a solution to that yet, but we certainly see the balance there. That's the number one issue. We've had very little root issues. We've had very little other diseases. We've had blight in the early years, but that's been 7 years since we've seen that. So yeah, it's powdery mildew is the one. It's actually one of our small growing zones, but we convert it in the late December till about this time of the year. We're almost done. We convert it to a propagation area. We put in a floor system, temporary, with a bottom watering mat, and we grow some new plants. So we've started moving our peppers out today. It's the last crop for the year. We did a rotation thing. Normally we would do peppers first. So they're at the end here. Some of them are looking a little less great, but they're rooted in well. They're going out, and they'll be planted over the next few days. So what we have in this area is it's fully top lit with LED lights. So we've got the lighting capacity to grow the young plants. What we use this zone several times. We'll run a couple of sets of plants through here, get them in here spread out. The cucumbers and tomatoes are the faster ones. The peppers are in here longer. And yeah, so we just go through that. We start all of our plants in a 128 cell tray. We seed them ourselves. Once they're ready, we transplant into 4-inch pots and we grow. These are a little bit on the smaller side, but given the time of year, and they're showing signs of being a little less happy in the pots, so we're going to get them out and get them planted into the soil where they can just take off from there. I don't like to leave plants in trays or pots any longer than they need to. Just with rooting, it seems like if the plant knows it's in a pot or it reaches its potential, then it thinks about it, and it will slow down its growth. And then when you transplant, it takes a little more time. If you can transplant right at the points where it's rooted in enough, the plant just keeps on going at a better pace, it seems like. So one thing, as I'm standing here looking behind me, I'm seeing a good example of our flower gutters. And so what you're seeing there is, well, you're seeing some buckwheat and other things. I've got some yarrow, and this is also somewhat newer to us. We used to grow in pots, but a hanging pot was easy to overwater or it's too dry. So we got custom built gutters where we can leave the soil and there's a lot more soil mass, and this way moisture is much easier to control. And so far they're flourishing, and that's one of our practices or thoughts behind getting a better ecosystem and having a better balance of good guys, bad guys, just giving them an alternative food source for parasitic wasps, or even attracting beneficial insects from the outdoor environment, which is also where I'd like to do more plantings of perennials and other annuals outside the greenhouse. It's really to try step back and look at the big picture. So it's just a thought. There's no real science behind it, but we keep playing with it and we keep trying to improve it and keep working with it. So that kind of covers, I think, what we wanted to hit on. I could definitely talk about Sap analysis, but we could have some questions first, either or.
You know what, we're cutting it close on time, so if you want to give us your like 1-2 minutes overview of Sap Analysis,
Sure.
maybe we can do that, and then we might have to move on. I'm not doing a good job of being a timekeeper.
No problem. Yeah, so on the Sap Analysis, what we do is every 3 weeks when we have crops in the greenhouse in production, we take what's called a new leaf sample. So we're looking for the first fully developed leaf on a plant. We get a sample from that, and we're looking for the last functional leaf. So towards the bottom of the plant, not where we're pruning, leaves that are still doing some work for the plant. We take those two different sets from the same plant set, and we're sending those off for Sap Analysis in Holland. We're using Novacrop, and what that allows us is gives us two results from each nutrient on that set of plants, and doing that every 3 weeks. And now we're in we started in 2015, and 2016 was the first full season, so we've got 5 full years of data on that. So that really allows us to have from even one set of data to know your trajectory, because you've got new leaves, old leaves. You know, okay, potassium is a mobile mineral, calcium is not. Using all of that knowledge, you can really work with the nutrition of the plant and try keep things in balance. And then tied very much with that, we use our foliar applications, and quite typically we're doing a foliar application every week on the greenhouse crop. So, and the foliar is really tweaking nutrient. It's not your main source of nutrition for your crop. It's the tweak. It's the little bit of manganese or a micronutrient here, or a little bit of potassium, even calcium on things like the mini cucumbers. Every crop tends to have a tendency, or some of them have more needs than others. But just that Sap Analysis is such a good tool for that. What does the plant need right away? And we're actually shipping it out on Monday, and I have the results Friday morning. So typically Friday morning we're already addressing issues that may be there from leaves that were collected on Monday morning. So that's my real quick rundown.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andrew. This has been fantastic, and I wish we had a full day to go over all of this. I think there's even so much more that we can probably see, and yeah, it's been wonderful seeing all the greenery and the beautiful soil. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And a big thank you to Southern Irrigation for sponsoring.